Carrie, did you sign the papers? Carrie looked blankly at the Civil Affairs Bureau hall in front of her. The urging voice of the staff finally snapped her back to reality. She had been reborn. Back to the day she and Henry were supposed to pick up their marriage certificate. Remembering the time in her previous life when she got the certificate, she was overjoyed. Got up early, excitedly rushed over to line up. But now, at the registry, she showed no trace of joy whatsoever. Henry's family is the most prominent in the city, with strict rules and lots of ceremonies. As the heir, Henry needed a wife who could be his strong support. She had to be gentle and devoted, her world revolving around him. So in her last life, to become the best wife, she gave up her future, herself. Quit her job to have kids, took on family responsibilities, and sacrificed her entire life. By her 50s, worn-out, illness took over. While bedridden, she stumbled upon a letter Henry wrote to his sister. "You're a free bird meant to soar the skies. I love you too much to see you tied down. Your sister reminds me of you a little. Every time I look at her face, I can imagine spending my life with you. She can handle everything, having kids, caring for elders, housework. All I want is for you to live freely and brightly every day." In that moment, she realized that Henry, who she thought she'd grow old with, had always loved Becky. It was all a plan. Discovering the truth was agony. Her son, instead of offering comfort, was overjoyed. At her bedside, he urged, "If Dad loves Aunt Becky, just divorce him already. Aunt Becky's a diplomat, you're just housewifing. You're not a match for Dad." After running the household so perfectly, her son suggested Aunt Becky wouldn't need to worry about anything when she married in. Let them be and give them your blessing. That day, she died from the shock and grief. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself back on the day she and Henry were to get married. Love yourself before others. This time, she wouldn't make the same mistakes. Just as she was about to speak, Henry's phone rang. Becky was calling. When he saw the name, his cold look softened. He stepped aside to answer. Whatever Becky said, after a minute, Henry came back to Carrie. "Carrie, your sister hurt her foot. As her brother-in-law, I should check on her. You sign and head back first." Without waiting for her reply, he rushed out. His assistant followed. "Henry, the meeting's about to start. This contract is worth billions. Are you sure you want to cancel?" With that, Henry sped away, disappearing into traffic. Watching him vanish, Carrie felt nothing but bitter irony. In her last life, her world revolved around Henry, not realizing his world revolved around Becky. How did she not see it? Wasted her whole life. The staff knocked on the glass. "Carrie, are you still signing this document?" Carrie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, I am." She picked up the pen and carefully wrote Becky's name on the application, then handed over the household registry page with Becky's info. "Henry, if you love her so much, then as you wish." Leaving the bureau, she looked at the marriage license in her hand, curling her lips. Groom Henry. Bride Becky. Wonder what Henry's reaction will be when he sees the certificates. Just as she tucked it into her bag, her phone rang. Answering it, the voice of the minister came through, just a bit regretful. "Carrie, are you sure you want to resign from your diplomatic post? We're talking top talent and I think highly of you. The future's bright. There's an overseas spot I had in mind for you. Then you suddenly said you wanted to quit. I know family's a priority, but I couldn't help but say more." Carrie cut in firmly. "Minister, I'm sorry, I was confused earlier. I'm not resigning. I want to take the overseas post." In her past life, she'd resigned right before the overseas opportunity, only for Becky to take it. Naively thought putting love over her dreams would earn Henry's love, but it just trapped her in a domestic role. Her creativity and talents dwindled away as Becky soared, becoming a national pride and a student icon. This time, she wouldn't let love hold her back, and certainly wouldn't sacrifice her life for Henry. From now on, she'd live for herself, shining bright. On the other end, the minister, surprised then thrilled. Great, that's fantastic. I'll submit your name immediately. Take the next few days off, prep at home. You'll leave in 2 weeks. Carrie paused. 2 weeks? That's the day of Becky and Henry's wedding. Carrie smiled and nodded, then hung up. Finishing these 2 things felt liberating. She caught a cab home. Outside the villa, Carrie entered the code to go in. Just as the doors opened, she heard a startled voice. "Brother-in-law, leaving sis at the bureau for me. Isn't that a bit much?" Henry was kneeling, massaging Becky's foot, his usually cold voice now gentle. "No way, your sister is very magnanimous. She wouldn't get mad over small things like this. That's why I married her." Standing at the doorway, Carrie chuckled wryly. Magnanimous, sure. So much so she arranged for him to marry his true love, Becky, this time. Unfazed, she walked in. Hearing the noise, Henry stood up, putting away the ointment. "You're back." "Becky hurt her foot. It hurts, so I'm helping. She'll be staying here for a few days." Carrie smiled lightly. "I know. With who you are, that's what you're supposed to do. About living here. Well, it makes sense. That sounds right. But when you think about it, it's kinda weird. Like there's some other meaning behind it." Just as he was about to continue speaking, Becky walked over with a smile. She linked her arm in Carrie's. "Thanks for letting me stay. I brought you a gift from my trip." As he spoke, he picked up a bag and handed it to Carrie. "Not to pick on you, but you're still young. Why dress so old-fashioned? Look, I got these for you from abroad." Carrie glanced at her own outfit. Simple black and white attire. Not flashy, but elegant and fitting for a young lady's role. She was a girl too, also liked bright colors. Yet in her previous life she wasted her youth for the sake of so-called decorum. Seeing Carrie looking down, Becky thought her words really struck a nerve. The smile on her lips widened. "Go try them on. See if they fit. You can wear them to work tomorrow." This time, before Carrie could respond, Henry chimed in. "Becky's quit her job. She's gonna be a full-time housewife. These clothes don't suit her. They suit you better. Keep them." Hearing this, Becky's eyes lit up. "Sis, you really quit." Her tone was full of pride and excitement, making Carrie pause. Carrie understood why Becky was so thrilled. In the past, they went to the same school, same major. Even both ended up at the foreign ministry. But Carrie was always one step ahead of Becky. Now, having quit voluntarily, how could Becky not be happy? Carrie didn't say anything. She just stayed silent, letting them misunderstand. Becky took her silence as agreement. She was overjoyed, her eyes filled with delight. Pulling on Henry's hand, "We've chatted so long. Brother-in-law, I'm a bit hungry. When's dinner?" Henry looked at Carrie. "It's about time. You should start cooking. Oh, and Becky doesn't eat onions or cilantro. Make sure not to add them." A tone she'd heard many times before, but now it felt so grating. She used to just walk to the kitchen without a word. But playing chef was when she still loved him. Now that's over. She wouldn't do anything for him. She thought about it, then looked up at him. "I'm not feeling well. Ask the housekeeper to do it." Henry frowned slightly. "Carrie, you know I love your cooking." A pang of bitterness hit Carrie's heart. She knew he often had stomach issues and was picky, so she spent time and effort perfecting recipes to comfort his stomach. In the end, his stomach was cured, but his taste grew picky. Not even Michelin chefs could satisfy him, only hers. She forced a smile. "You should get used to it. What if I'm not around someday?" Henry didn't get it. "Not around? Where would you go?" Sensing the shift, Becky quickly chimed in. "Let me cook instead." "Nah," Henry refused instinctively. "You're too pampered for kitchen work." Becky felt touched and gave a shy smile, but Carrie just smirked, ignoring their cozy scene, tossed out, "Either way, I'm not cooking," and retreated to her room. It ended with Henry taking Becky out to dine. Henry seemed oblivious to the change, or maybe didn't care. He assumed she loved him too much to leave. He just thought she was mad at being left alone at the Civic Center today. So the next day he skipped meetings to take her to try on wedding dresses. The entire bridal store was cleared. All staff catered to Carrie alone. When the curtains opened, Carrie appeared in a wedding dress, white all over, with swirling crystal roses on vine patterns, accented the dress. In the soft glow, Carrie looked almost mythical. Seeing the amazed faces of the staff, Becky's eyes flickered with envy. She approached, admiring the dress. "Sis, your dress is stunning. I could see myself in it." Carrie smiled. Why not try it on? It was almost unheard of for a bride to let someone try her wedding dress. Ignoring the bad omen, Carrie carried on, looking at Henry. He was indifferent when Carrie appeared, but when Becky tried on the dress, Desire crept in his eyes. She realized he longed to see Becky as a bride, though they couldn't be together. The curtain opened again. Becky stepped out in the same dress. Why doesn't it suit me? She stood at the mirror, complaining it was too big. Carrie simply smiled and told the staff, alter it to her size. Becky was surprised. Henry, who had been watching Becky, snapped back. What are you doing? Carrie just smiled. No big deal. There's time before the wedding, I could take it in anyway. She was fibbing. Henry had altered the marriage license, making Becky the bride. So naturally, the wedding belonged to Becky. The dress should fit her. When choosing wedding rings, Carrie handed Becky a huge diamond ring to try, not caring if she liked it, asking constantly about Becky's preferences. Only after matching Becky's taste, they picked it. Even the wedding shoes followed suit. After so much, Henry finally sensed something was off. Outside the mall, he was about to speak, but Becky tugged his sleeve. Brother-in-law, I want mango ice cream. He put Becky first, and without a word walked away. Pretty soon, Henry came over holding 2 ice creams. Both were mango-flavored. When Henry handed one of them to Carrie, she didn't reach for it. I'm allergic to mango, she said. A hint of awkwardness flashed across Henry's face. I'll go get you a different one. Once Henry's figure disappeared beyond the horizon, Becky raised the ice cream in her hand triumphantly, looking at Carrie smugly. Sis, you must have noticed by now, right? He's always liked me. I mean, why else would he remember my favorite flavor and not even know you're allergic? Her taunting words reached Carrie's ears, but they didn't change her calm expression. It only made Becky more displeased as she inched closer, her words growing increasingly vicious. Ever since we were kids, I've always been overshadowed by you, except for this. I've won this one completely. How does it feel knowing the person you've loved for so long only cares about me?
I'm thrilled, honestly.
You've always had the upper hand, but finally I get to see you suffer. As Becky spoke, a smile like a poppy spread across her lips, like a serpent's venom, making Carrie shiver internally. Before she could react, Becky gave her a sudden shove. Carrie, feeling weightless, tumbled down the stairs. In the swirling chaos, she instinctively grabbed at Becky's outstretched hand. With 2 massive thuds, both Carrie and Becky rolled down the steps. Carrie felt like her bones were falling apart. As she struggled to stand, a spasming pain tore through her stomach, followed by a warm sensation. She glanced down with trembling eyes only to see blood, a lot of it. Before she could process it all, Becky was already crying out in pain nearby. In the distance, Henry saw it all, letting his ice cream fall to the ground. Though they both fell, he rushed to Becky's side first, cradling her into the car and speeding to the hospital. Not once did he glance at Carrie, lying in a pool of blood. The sky took a turn for the worse, clouds gathering overhead as rain began to fall. The rain washed away the blood beneath Carrie, sending a mixture of rainwater and blood down the drain. Her stomach pain was so intense she lost all strength, her consciousness fading until she passed out. When she came to, Carrie found herself in a hospital, learning it was a passerby who'd brought her in. Henry was entirely preoccupied with Becky's injuries, probably unaware Carrie had also fallen. Or maybe he just didn't care, because she wasn't the one he kept in his heart. But it didn't matter. Henry and Becky were officially married now. Pale and shaky, Carrie tried to rise and handle the discharge papers when a doctor entered with a report. Carrie, congratulations, you're pregnant. Falling from such a height, and being brought here in time, saved your baby's life. The words filled her head with a loud buzzing sound. How could she forget? In her past life, this was exactly when she got pregnant too. Back then, she'd been overjoyed to learn she was carrying Henry's child, pledging to be a good mom and give the baby all her love. But in the end, the son she carried for 9 months, how did he repay her? By trying to convince her to divorce in favor of Henry and Becky while she lay bedridden. Thinking of this, her lips twisted with resolve. Doctor, I don't want this kid. Please schedule the procedure. The doctor was taken aback but didn't pry further, just handed her the consent form for the procedure. That evening, Carrie brought the abortion form home. Henry was in the kitchen himself, making soup for Becky, whose bones were bruised. When she came in, he barely glanced up, showing no concern for her injuries. With a sad smile, Carrie slightly concealed the consent form and handed it to Henry. Henry, the wedding planners called. The venue's nearly ready. They need your signature on this document. Unused to cooking, Henry was busy making soup for Becky while also eager to check on her. So he casually said, "You handle it from now on." Without even looking, he quickly signed the abortion consent form. The next day, Carrie, consent form signed, went straight for her abortion. Afterwards, weak from surgery, she had to stay in the hospital longer. During those days, she kept spotting photos of Henry on Becky's social media. The Henry who never liked taking photos was now happily posing for many with Becky. The Henry who never visited amusement parks was a VIP there now, with Becky. The Henry who detested street food was dressed in a suit eating skewers with Becky at a small table. All the things he never did with her, he was doing with Becky. For this reason, Becky even posted on social media, boasting happily about having a wonderful brother-in-law. And Henry quietly liked the post. Carrie shut her eyes, laying the phone face down beside her. It didn't matter. She'd be leaving soon. At the family dinner, Carrie saw Henry again, with Becky clinging to his arm. Perhaps since Becky and Carrie's relationship had deteriorated, Becky didn't even bother hiding it anymore. And naive Henry, treating Becky like a sister, just went along with it. Ignoring them, Carrie headed indoors, but as she reached the living room, a stern voice interrupted. "Gone for a few days and you've forgotten your manners?" Instinctively, Carrie looked up to see Henry's mother glaring at her coldly. Her heart sank instantly. They were really into rules. Henry's mom was especially harsh, especially with his future daughter-in-law, who she didn't like. Every time she came home, Henry's mother would find any excuse to punish her in the name of teaching her manners. Sure enough, the next minute, Henry's mom was nitpicking. "What are you wearing? And how can you walk ahead of Henry?" Carrie's hands clenched at her sides. In her last life, she tried to manage the mother-in-law relationship well, so Henry wouldn't have a hard time. No matter what Henry's mom said, she put up with it. Whatever rules she set, Carrie accepted them. But now she didn't want to put up with it anymore. After all, she's not her daughter-in-law this time. So she wasn't planning on listening to Henry's mom and turned to go upstairs. "You've got to be kidding me. Are you deaf? Didn't you hear me?" Seeing Carrie's attitude, Henry's mother slammed her hand on the table. "Bring the family rules." When Henry and Becky came in, they saw Henry's mom having the servants force Carrie to kneel. Just with one glance, Henry knew Carrie had annoyed his mom. So he didn't say anything and just sat down with Becky. Seeing this unfold, Carrie felt a chill in her heart. Just like before, he wouldn't stand up for her. Hot tea poured into the cup Carrie was holding. The tea kept overflowing, spilling onto her hands. Her once pale hands turned bright red, with some spots blistering. Carrie's face turned pale from the pain, and she reflexively tried to shake off the hot cup, but the servant held her still. A cry came from Becky. "Oh my gosh." Henry's mom's face changed with worry as she said, "What are you standing there for? Quickly get Becky out of here. We don't want her scared." Hearing this, Henry covered Becky's eyes gently and let her out. He quietly reassured her, saying, "Don't worry, Mom's just teaching manners. This doesn't involve you." Only when the last drop from the teapot was poured did the servant release Carrie's hand. Crash. The cup broke on the ground. Henry's mom didn't even give it a glance as she got up and left. Carrie looked at her now reddened hands and gave a bitter smile. Once she had tended to her burns and made it to the dining room, Henry, Becky, and Henry's mom were already eating dinner. Henry's mom was busy serving Becky food, urging her to eat more. Becky shyly nodded, while Henry's mom fondly watched her and sighed. "If only you were my daughter-in-law." The words made everyone's faces change. Finally, Henry spoke in a deep voice, "Mom, Carrie is standing right here." But Henry's mom didn't care and gave an annoyed look at Carrie, who was standing by. If Henry liked Becky in secret, then Henry's mom liked Becky openly. Countless times, Henry's mom had expressed her wish for Becky to be her daughter-in-law. If Henry hadn't insisted on marrying her, his mom would have gotten her wish long ago. For a moment, Carrie wanted to tell Henry's mom, "Becky already is her daughter-in-law." But before she could speak, Henry's mom said coldly, "What are you standing around for? Serve us." Yep, serving was another lesson Henry's mom was teaching Carrie. Every meal, Carrie stood by, peeling shrimp and picking out fish bones for them. By the time it was her turn to eat, only scraps were left. Carrie glanced at Becky, who wore a smug look, and suddenly said, "Becky, why not learn this too? After all, you're the one marrying into this family soon." Hearing this, Becky's smile froze. "She never needs to learn this," Henry said flatly, placing peeled shrimp in Becky's bowl. Carrie lowered her eyes, hiding the mockery in them. "Henry, you're wrong. In 7 days she'll be your bride." After dinner, Becky kept glancing at her phone. Henry leaned in, concerned. "What's up?" "I nearly forgot, I've got tickets for a concert. But leaving now might upset your mom, right?" Henry softly said, "Don't worry, I'll go with you," and then stood up. "Mom, I've got some urgent work at the office, need to head out." Without thinking twice, Henry's mom urged him to go. Henry gave Becky a look, and she quickly said goodbye to Henry's mom. Soon the two left everyone's sight. Hearing everything, Carrie felt a bitter sense of irony. She had spent a lifetime with him, thinking he'd only cared for work. Who knew he'd attend a concert, even lie to Henry's mom for Becky's sake? Looks like she'd handle the upcoming mother-in-law relationship just fine. With Henry gone, Carrie had no reason to stick around either. Without glancing at Henry's mom, she turned and walked out. Even as Henry's mom threw a teacup to the ground, she didn't look back. Of course, Henry's mom wouldn't offer her a ride, and Henry sure wouldn't come to pick her up. This place was in a villa district, no cabs around. Carrie walked home alone, taking a full 3 hours. She got back with blistered, rubbed raw heels and treated them before crashing into bed. It wasn't until the next day that Henry and Becky came back. Becky sported a concert tiara, looking all kinds of happy. Henry approached and placed several invitations on the table before Carrie. "See any styles you like?" Carrie didn't answer. She then pointed to one and asked Becky, "Do you like this one?" Becky didn't get it but still nodded. "Yeah, I like it." "All right," Carrie nodded, extracting that card and handing it to Henry. But Henry didn't answer. He just gave Carrie a somber look. Why did he always ask Becky about everything? The wedding dress, the rings, the shoes, the venue. Even the invites had to go through Becky, like she was the bride, not Carrie. There was a moment when Carrie thought about stepping aside, but she quickly dismissed it. Carrie loved him too much to just hand him over to someone else. After the invitation design was finalized, Carrie volunteered to address them. Her reason? It was a good one. You only get married once, so writing the invites by hand made it meaningful. There were over 3,000 invitations to send. "You sure?" Henry was puzzled by her behavior. "I'm sure," Carrie said. That night, she sat at the table, writing each invite one by one. Most of the content was pre-filled. She just needed to add the names of the invitees and the couple. With focus, she wrote Henry in the groom's box and Becky in the bride's box. She was filled with hope and dreams of her life with Henry. But after marrying Henry, she realized life with him was miserable. He spent most of his time with Becky. One call from Becky and Henry would drop everything to be with her. Even at home, he'd be on the phone with Becky constantly. She argued with him about it, but he'd always say, "She's just like a sister to me." She didn't understand. If he didn't love her, why marry her? It all became clear when, on her deathbed, she discovered the love letters he had written to Becky. The regrets of her past life ended when she broke free. 3 days before the wedding, Carrie and Henry did their final rehearsal on a cruise ship. Every previous rehearsal was just Carrie and Henry, but this time she invited Becky. After the rehearsal, Carrie stepped out on the deck to catch some sea breeze. The weather wasn't great, though. The skies were dark and moody. Just as she was about to head back inside, she heard Becky's voice. "Carrie, what are you up to recently? Why'd you invite me to the wedding rehearsal? Aren't you afraid I'll steal your fiancé?" Carrie smirked. "Do you even need to steal? He's already yours." Becky was taken aback by this and insisted on getting to the bottom of it. Carrie tried to pull away, but just then the weather turned. A strong wind hit like a tidal wave, knocking them both into the sea. The freezing water engulfed them instantly. Carrie was terrified of the water. The more she struggled to swim up, the more she panicked, sinking deeper. As she broke the surface, she saw Henry jumping into the sea, frantically heading toward Becky. He saved her, taking her ashore, calling her name, even giving her CPR. All the while, he ignored Carrie's cries for help. Just like before, Henry always chose Becky. Carrie was always the one left behind. The sounds around her faded, and her strength waned as she sank into the depths. When she awoke, she found herself in a hospital. Henry's mom was complaining beside her. In between her words, Carrie learned she'd been rescued by the search crew. Meanwhile, Henry hadn't left Becky's side. "Look at this. You can't even handle a wedding rehearsal without causing trouble. You're not like Becky at all. If Henry didn't insist on marrying you, I would have preferred Becky as my daughter-in-law." Henry insisted, did he? No, he didn't. He couldn't bear to see Becky trapped in marriage. He thought she was a bird meant to fly. So even though he might love her, he wouldn't let rules bind her. It was time to leave. As she looked at the clock, she knew it was her time. No more holding back. "As you wished, Henry's marrying Becky," she said. Henry's mother was stunned, speechless for a moment. "What did you say?" Rather than explain, Carrie handed her 2 marriage certificates. "I know you like Becky and Henry does too. Because of some reasons we couldn't make it official until now. When we registered, I wrote Becky's name on the form and handed in her information. She's the bride." The shock on Henry's mom's face turned to delight as she took the certificates and checked the names. "Well, it's about time you did something right," she said. When Carrie was discharged, it was just her, and a text from Henry finally reached her. "Becky's shaken up. I can't leave her. Take care, see you at the wedding." Carrie stared at the message for a long time before turning off her phone and heading down the stairs. "You won't see me there." In the quiet of her empty house, Carrie packed up the wedding dress, rings, shoes, everything needed for the ceremony, and put them in a large box, mailing it to Becky. Before leaving, she left Henry 3 simple sentences. "Henry, by the time you read this, your wedding with Becky will be over. You're welcome. I know you've always liked him, so I'm letting you guys be together. I'm heading toward my own bright future. Our ties are severed. We don't need to see each other again in this life." As the clock struck midnight, Carrie walked briskly out of the villa with her suitcase in hand. On the day the 2 families united, the place was packed with guests. In the lively hall, everyone chatted quietly while awaiting the newlyweds' entrance. In the lounge, Henry stood before the full-length mirror, carefully adjusting his clothes. Looking at himself in the mirror, there was a moment of daze. He was getting married after all, but not to the person he truly liked. This thought cast a shadow over his eyes for a moment. Just then there was a knock on the door from outside. The wedding was about to begin. Henry hesitated for a moment and then responded, "I'll be right there." In the middle of a stage decorated with baby's breath and roses, Henry stood watching the grand doors slowly open. A bride in a white wedding dress, train trailing, carefully made her way in. Her fine face was hidden beneath a long veil. But for some reason, Henry was reminded of a scene from long ago. When the curtain in the fitting room opened slowly, Carrie in a white wedding dress appeared before him. At that time, just like now, he forgot to breathe, forgot everything. He couldn't react at all because Carrie truly stunned him. Even if he didn't like Carrie, he had to admit that Carrie was stunning. In the following days, Henry dreamed of Carrie many times. Until the bride stopped in front of Henry. That's when he snapped back to reality. With a reminder from the officiant, Henry took a deep breath and reached out to lift the bride's veil. But as he extended his hand, he suddenly realized something was off. When did Carrie become so short? Frowning, he finally lifted the bride's veil. The moment he saw the bride's face clearly, his eyes widened in shock. It wasn't awe, it was disbelief. "How is it you?" Originally bashful with her head down, Becky's eyes instantly turned red with tears upon hearing this. "Why can't it be me?" Becky's aggrieved words and her face were projected on the big screen. Yet none of the guests showed surprise. Even Henry's mom beside him was full of delight. Suddenly, Henry's heart began to race uncontrollably. He had an inexplicable sense of foreboding. He tried to steady his chaotic thoughts, feigning calm as he asked Becky why she was here. He was supposed to be marrying Carrie. Why had it turned into Becky? And where was Carrie? Did she know about this bride swap? Too many questions swirled in his mind. Becky, without any warning, cluelessly replied, "How would I know where she is?" As soon as Becky returned to her room after leaving the hospital, she saw a box with wedding rings and gowns and then a letter from Carrie. It read, "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness and intimate companionship." Initially, Becky didn't understand its meaning, thinking it was a prank by Carrie. until Henry's mom called, insinuating that the bride had changed, and asking if she'd be willing to be Henry's bride. Becky's mind went blank. She couldn't hear anything else. Her thoughts were filled with marrying Henry. Of course she was willing. Becky had liked Henry since she was a child. She noticed Henry liked her too, but didn't know why Henry refused to marry her and chose Carrie instead. She'd been bitter about this for years. So when Henry's mom asked again if she was willing, she nodded frantically in agreement. Everything that followed seemed like a dream to Becky. She hazily put on the fitted wedding dress, slipped into the perfect heels, and then dazedly got into the wedding car and arrived at the venue. She saw Henry in a suit. It was only then that Becky realized she wasn't dreaming. She was really marrying the person she had liked for years. But before she could show her joy, the person in front of her suddenly changed his expression, asking why the bride was her and where Carrie was. Why Carrie again? Did he really like Carrie that much? Becky's face turned somber too. Henry, the one marrying you today is me. Can you not keep mentioning someone irrelevant? Henry clenched his fist, forcing himself to stay calm. Becky, please don't cause a scene. The bride today is Carrie. If suddenly the bride is swapped, it'll affect your reputation. Becky's face turned pale, tears streaming instantly, gripping her palm tightly, choking out, but it's me marrying you today. From the guest seats, Henry's mom sensed something amiss and hurriedly approached, whispering, what's going on? Becky's the one marrying you today. Henry frowned tightly, his words carrying a hint of irritation. Mom, why are you also making a commotion? I know you've always wanted Becky as your daughter-in-law, but is this the time for that? If the bride swap gets out, our family will become a laughingstock in the entire circle, especially since today's wedding is being live-streamed. I can already imagine how lively it'll be online shortly. Henry's mom, exasperated, closed her eyes momentarily, and then pulled an exquisite wedding invitation from her purse. Take a good look. Whose name is written as the bride's on this invitation? When Henry saw Becky's name on the invitation, his mind went blank instantly. He stared hard at the name, the paper crumpling from his grip. What on earth was happening? Seeing her son like this, Henry's mom finally decided to lay it all out. Carrie was sensible enough to voluntarily swap herself out for Becky, so everything has worked out as wished. Henry, you've always liked me, haven't you? Beside him, Becky also reached out to take his hand, but Henry heard none of it. His mind was fixed on one sentence from his mom. Carrie volunteered to swap out for Becky. She volunteered. He thought she loved him all along. Why should I change? Henry's face darkened. He pushed Becky's hand away and headed out. He needed answers. Seeing Henry being so relentless, Becky panicked and tried to stop him. The wedding was still ongoing. Where are you going? Looking at Becky's anxious face, Henry's eyes softened with a hint of mercy. After clenching his fists for a long time, he bitterly said, sorry. Becky, I can't marry you. Like a bolt from the blue. Becky couldn't hear anything else. She stared at him, full of disbelief. He must have misheard. Henry liked her so much. How could he not want to marry her? But the man in front of her didn't explain. He just walked past her, heading outside. Stop! Henry's mother yelled sternly. Word by word she said, this marriage you will complete it, whether you want to or not. Your marriage certificate with Becky is already stamped. A thunderous crash echoed across the sky. Lightning, accompanied by heavy rain, slammed onto the ground. The bright flash illuminated Henry's pale face. He stood there in shock for a long time. He finally turned around stiffly. Mom, what do you mean? The wedding concluded hastily. Both families became a laughingstock. Switching brides, sister swapping, groom fainting, and related topics dominated the trending list for a whole week. And since Henry was hospitalized, he seemed like a changed man. He refused to see anyone. His mind was a complete mess. Why had things turned out this way? In the description given by Henry's mom and Becky, Carrie knew long ago that he and Becky liked each other, so she willingly stepped aside to let them be together. Hearing this, Henry, who was already upset, furiously swiped everything off the table. Why does Carrie always make decisions for herself? She never even asked if he was willing. Henry's mother was startled by his reaction, utterly confused. She left, Can't you be with Becky forever? Thinking about this, Henry tightened his grip on the bedsheet. It's true he wanted to be with Becky forever. But just at that moment, his phone started vibrating like crazy. Henry answered, and heard his mother's piercing screams over the phone. Henry, come to the rooftop quick. Becky, she wants to jump. Henry's mind went blank. He forgot everything else, jumped out of bed and ran to the rooftop. On the hospital rooftop, Becky stood precariously on the edge, eyes shattered as she looked at him. Why are you doing this to me? I love you so much. Why won't you marry me? Always avoiding, never giving me an explanation. Her words turned into grief. Seeing her so emotional, Henry's complexion turned white with fear, and his voice became shaky. Becky, let's come down first, okay? Saying that, he carefully tried to grab her hand, but Becky saw right through him and stepped back. Don't come closer. Henry's heart raced as he tried to calm his nerves. Becky, if you come down, I'll agree to anything you want. Okay. Becky was stunned, then cautiously asked, Really? Henry nodded longingly, and once more carefully reached out his hand. Becky hesitated, then finally handed him her hand. In an instant, Henry pulled her down, holding her tightly as if losing her would destroy him. After a long silence, Becky looked back up at him, tears filling her eyes. Henry, I just want to know, why are you so resistant to marrying me? You clearly like me so much. As she was someone dear to his heart, Henry hesitated for a long time. He finally revealed the secret he had buried for years. You are a bird meant to fly free in the skies, to chase your dreams. I don't want to cage you. That's why I proposed to your sister. For one, she is more willing and better suited as the lady of this house. Another reason is, if I tie her down, her diplomat position and the opportunity to be stationed in the U.S. would become yours. Perhaps not expecting this reason, Becky was touched, looking at him with warmth in her voice. But I don't mind. I can be a diplomat. And also Mrs. Shin. Henry looked at her with pain flickering in his eyes. But I don't want you to be so burdened. Becky shook her head and was about to stand on tiptoe to kiss him. At that moment, an elderly voice suddenly interrupted the moment. How can Henry's wife be so public? With those words, Becky's face turned white, quickly hiding behind Henry. Henry's face changed too as he looked at the old lady. Grandmother, why are you here? The old lady ignored him, casting a cold eye at Becky. A disgraceful fool. Have you forgotten the rules? Becky bit her lip, mumbling softly, Grandmother. But the old lady was unmoved, ordering the two bodyguards behind her to take Becky back to learn the rules. Upon hearing this, both faces dropped. In their family, the women are expected to run the household while the men work. Moreover, compared to Henry's mother, the old lady was more strict with rules. Nobody could escape her grasp. This was why Henry was reluctant to let Becky marry into the family. Grandmother, Becky isn't in good health. Is that necessary? The old lady slapped him, her words dripping with sarcasm. Not in good health but causing drama on the rooftop. Really? In the days that followed, Becky remained at the old house, kneeling in front of the old lady learning the rules. Every day before dawn he gets up. He can't sleep until the wee hours. In less than a week, Becky is on the verge of a mental breakdown. Henry wants to rescue her, but whenever he gets near the old house, the old lady clutches her heart and claims chest pain. Plus, the company has been having a ton of issues. He's swamped with work, so there's no way he can help Becky. All he can do is tend to her wounds full of concern after every session of learning the family rules. Finally, Becky can't take it anymore. She calls her mentor late at night to ask about the position Carrie left after quitting. She wonders when it'll be her turn or when she can get posted to the U.S. But the mentor's voice is cold. That spot has already been filled, and the new person has already gone to the U.S. Because Becky has missed work a lot, her current position will be downgraded to the lowest level. When Henry comes in, he sees Becky's tear-streaked face. His heart skips a beat, and he quickly goes over to hug her, full of concern. Is your wound hurting again? Becky shakes her head, finally sharing what's bothering her. After hearing her out, Henry surprisingly feels a bit disappointed. He thought Becky married into this family out of deep love for him. But now, Becky can barely manage a few days of family rules and already wants to flee. Maybe Becky's love for him isn't that deep after all. For some reason, Henry suddenly thinks of Carrie. If it were Carrie, she'd definitely persevere for him. Speaking of Carrie, ever since the wedding, Henry has been desperately trying to find her. But her contact is unreachable, and she seems to have vanished. The only ones who might know where she is, her parents, are diplomats stationed in some small African country and are impossible to contact. With this in mind, Henry loses his will to comfort Becky any further. He pats her back and excuses himself, pretending to look for a solution, and leaves the room. But halfway he remembers he forgot his phone, so he turns back to get it. As his hand touches the doorknob, Becky's sharp voice pierces through the door, telling someone to scram. She claims they've already settled accounts before, and how dare they ask for more. The voice on the other end gets heated up. She wanted them to kill Carrie, and now their leader is in prison because things went awry. Why shouldn't she pay up? She retorts, threatening to expose Becky's plan to hire a hitman. Becky laughs, daring them to speak up, and doubts anyone would believe them. Suddenly, the door is kicked open from the outside. Becky screams, her jaw dropping at an enraged Henry. Overnight, everything changes in the household. Becky is completely locked in the old mansion. Originally, Henry wanted to send Becky to jail, but considering her parents' status, they decide to lock her up until her parents return. Even so, no one wants a murderer for a daughter-in-law. So the next day, Henry hands her divorce papers. Becky goes crazy, tearing the agreement into pieces. Henry is unfazed after hearing the reports. He's got all the time to deal with it. Just then, a call from his assistant comes in. I found Miss Carrie. You should check the news. Henry opens the news to see a woman in a sharp suit on the podium. The headline reads, New representative of our diplomatic mission to the U.S. Carrie. It's Carrie 3 months into her U.S. stint. Since moving, she's buried herself in work. She's not tired but excited. Being busy feels like living for herself, unlike before when she wasted away in their trivial affairs. After finishing her last task, she checks her phone's notes. Next week she'll finally have the chance to visit her parents in a small African country. Just the thought of reuniting with her parents after so many years keeps Carrie awake with excitement. She double-checks the gifts prepared for them and only relaxes when everything is set. A week later, Carrie lands at an airport in some African country. She then takes a bus to her parents' base. Along the way, she sees the local cultures, alongside heartbreaking scenes from war-torn areas. Her heart aches for her parents, wondering how they've managed all these years. Reaching the embassy area, Carrie and her parents embrace tightly at the door and cry their hearts out. Her father eventually breaks it up, suggesting dinner. By nightfall, as Carrie sits with them looking at the moon, they chat about all things until the topic drifts to Becky. Carrie knows the initial events but had no clue about Becky's murderous plans or Henry's divorce intentions. The thugs' attack made her suspect Becky, but she never had proof, and Henry was always her shield. The fact remains Henry deeply loved Becky. In the past, despite Becky's repeated transgressions, even one that nearly cost Carrie her life, Henry covered it all up. How could he now choose to divorce Becky? Carrie's parents are still angry over Becky. We gave you both the same education, they say in frustration. The same kind of love. Why did she go off the rails like that? And then there's that Shinjia. Back then, your dad and I could tell right away that person wasn't any good. We even told y'all. But she didn't listen, just had to jump into the fire pit. And not just jump, but treating you like that over a man? Carrie's mom was getting more and more worked up. Carrie tried to comfort her while thinking about the past. Carrie's parents had tried to warn her too, saying that family wasn't right for her. But at the time, she was head over heels for Henry. No amount of persuasion from her folks could change her mind. She even quit her diplomatic job for him and gave up her overseas post. Her parents were heartbroken and took Becky abroad. They never saw her again before they passed. Everyone said Carrie's parents were embarrassed by her, but only Carrie knew the truth. It was her father's grief over her death that left him bedridden. Seeing their gray hair, Carrie felt a pang in her chest. She silently vowed to treat her parents right this time around. After a while, her parents decided to write to friends back home for help handling the Becky situation. They were ready to accept whatever came of it, basically saying they were giving up on Becky. Just as Carrie's parents were nudging her to go to bed, the phone rang. As they hung up, a seriousness fell over their faces. They got dressed and headed out, telling Carrie, "You should get some rest. We'll be back after we take care of a few things." Carrie nodded quickly, reminding them to stay safe. But her parents didn't come back for 3 whole days. Finally, a news report revealed what had happened. Someone driving through a conflict zone came under fire. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Since part of the conflict area was in the country where Carrie's parents lived, and knowing the visitors were from back home, they had gone to check on them. Initially, they just needed to confirm everyone was okay and persuade them to leave. Then they could have returned. But one of the wounded folks remained unconscious. When Carrie caught sight of the injured person's face on TV, she froze. It was Henry. Her mind went blank. Henry was supposed to be safe at home. Why in the world was he in such a dangerous place? Just then she heard a car honk outside. Looking up, she saw her mother step out of a car. Carrie hurried to greet her. "Mom." Her mom acknowledged her, asking, "Why are you still up?" Carrie shrugged with a small smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd sit outside for a bit." Then glancing behind her mom, she asked, "Where's Dad?" Her mom sighed. "He's still at the hospital, upset with Henry. And it's weird. When Henry woke up, he's like a different person. Keeps saying he wants to see you. Admitting he and our son made a mistake choosing Becky over you." Carrie's mom kept talking about Henry's odd behavior, but Carrie felt a chill run through her. An unexpected thought hit her. Henry had also come back to life. At that moment, her mom's phone rang. After some sighs and Henry's pleading voice over the line, her mom looked at Carrie hesitantly. "Henry is begging to talk to you," your dad said. Carrie sighed quietly, knowing she couldn't avoid this. Taking the phone, she walked a little ways off and answered, "Hello?" The noisy chatter on the other end suddenly died down, yet no one spoke for a long time. As she prepared to hang up, a familiar voice, one she hadn't heard in ages, called out from the other side. "Carrie." Just that simple word dragged her memory back to their past life. Back then, Henry seemed to genuinely love her. In public, he'd call her Mrs. or wife, and at home, he'd affectionately call her Carrie. His closeness kept Carrie trapped in the illusion of love. She clung to Henry tightly, ignoring anyone's attempts to pull her away, eventually ending up alone. Hearing no response, Henry chuckled bitterly on the phone's other end. "Carrie, I know you came back to life too. Otherwise, you'd still be the one marrying me. Carrie, you need to know I only realized how much you meant after you were gone. Becky never really loved us. She tired of me and ran off with younger men using my money. She even tried seducing our son." His voice seethed with disdain. "Maybe it was fate giving me another shot. I swear I'll treat you right this time, Carrie. Please come back." Coldness filled Carrie's eyes as she replied icily, "Let me remind you of 3 things. First, our child, I miscarried and you signed off on the paperwork." A crash of glass sounded through the phone, but Carrie pressed on unfazed. "Second, it seems your realization came a bit late. I did so much for you and our child, clearly saw through Becky's facade, and yet, it's only in my death that you regret. Third, I'm never going back. Why should I give up my future and my dreams like last time, just to live your carefree life? Or do you want me to sacrifice everything again, devoting myself entirely as your wife? Your so-called love is quite selfish. Henry, I don't want to be a caged bird." Then Carrie abruptly hung up on him. She took a deep breath, looking down at the fingernail marks in her palm, bleeding slightly. Throughout the call, Carrie had been clenching her fist tightly to control her emotions. That night, Carrie surprisingly slept well. Meanwhile, on the other side, Henry tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Carrie's words. It kept playing over and over in his head. She said she didn't want to be a caged bird. In a past life, he had clipped her wings, deceiving her into living a life that others envied. He thought that even if he didn't love her, a comfortable life could keep her happy. So he left her repeatedly to take care of Becky. Eventually, even their son started doing the same. Carrie had argued with him about this, but Henry thought she was just being unreasonable. He believed he had given her everything but love. What more could she want? He forgot that Carrie came from a prominent family too. As a wealthy woman, she wasn't short of material things but deeply craved love, due to her constantly traveling parents. He only realized this after his death and rebirth. After he was reborn, the first thing he wanted to do was reconcile with Carrie. He imagined many possible reactions from her, but he didn't expect her to be so calm. This was the least desirable outcome for Henry. Her calmness meant she didn't love him, she didn't care about him, and it meant there was no chance for them. Henry didn't want to accept this. He sighed deeply, glancing at his phone screen. On it was the only picture he had with Carrie, one she had insisted they take years ago. Carrie had always been proper, every move, every word, every expression trained into her over the years. So when one day she finally broke down, his first reaction wasn't to comfort her but to ask if all her manners were for nothing. After that, at least in front of him, Carrie never lost control again. Henry closed his eyes, turning his attention back to the stage. Amidst applause, Carrie gracefully stepped down, engaging in conversation with international guests. Throughout the entire evening, Henry couldn't find a chance to talk to her, and even when the event ended, and he tried to follow, Carrie's security team dutifully kept him at bay. For over a month, Henry chased Carrie from Africa to America, never getting a moment alone with her. But he refused to give up. His family's business had some issues in America, so he decided to stay there. Hoping to see Carrie more, he even chose to live near the embassy. Unbeknownst to Henry, Carrie was preoccupied with something else. Her mentors were setting her up on dates. After the last ordeal, her parents started worrying about her settling down. They didn't want her to end up alone after they passed. Eager to help, her mentors introduced many impressive young men from the embassy. Carrie politely declined each until she met one, Jason. She hadn't expected to run into the man who'd once saved her from a bunch of thugs at the embassy. Jason smiled at her and said, "Long time no see. How've you been?" Maybe it was fate, but their date went exceptionally well. Her mentors were thrilled, even offering to cook to celebrate their budding relationship. At her mentor's home, Carrie and Jason stood on either side, helping out in the kitchen. At the dinner table, Jason sweetly peeled shrimp for her and even knew of her distaste for onions, something she had never told anyone. On the way home, questions about Jason filled Carrie's mind, including the time he saved her. This was only their second meeting. How did he know so much about her? She voiced her curiosity and Jason, holding her hand tightly, looked deeply into her eyes. "Carrie, for you this is just the beginning, but for me I've known you for a long time. It's just that you never noticed me before." To prove his point, Jason took her to his study, pulling out a thick photo album from a drawer. "These pictures are from when we were in high school. I asked my friend to snap these with you in the background." As Jason narrated each photo, Carrie flipped through them. In every picture, Jason was gazing at her with adoration, while she was looking somewhere else with the same intense gaze. It wasn't hard to guess who she was looking at outside the frame. After looking through the album, Carrie felt overwhelmed with emotions. "I never knew about this," she said softly. It couldn't be helped back then. Carrie only had eyes for Henry. But Jason just laughed it off, saying, "It's okay. I can tell you all about our story now. If every high school had a golden boy, then in their school Jason was definitely it." At every school talent show, Jason always sat right in the front row. Before, he thought of the student speakers as okay, but when Carrie walked on stage he sat up straight. She was a stunning girl. That was his first impression. Especially when she talked about her dream to become a diplomat. His curiosity in her grew. And after that he worked to get to know her. 11. Getting to know her and finally falling for her. Took him 10 years. Today he finally won her over. Yet it's just another work day. While Carrie was busy at her desk, the teacher came by, asking him to shoot a video. The teacher nodded and said, "Recently, many officials are creating fun videos on social media. It boosts our reputation and lets people get to know us. Who knows, someone might dream of becoming a diplomat after watching our videos." Carrie nodded, took the sports camera from the teacher. Now the challenge was, who would he shoot the video with? "So you want to invite me to shoot a short video together?" Carrie looked at Jason and nodded, adding, "But I'm new to this short video thing. I have no idea how to make one. To make it interesting and engage young viewers while promoting diplomatic knowledge, well, that's quite a task." Jason patted his head. "No worries, we got this. We'll figure it out." They spent the whole afternoon at their desks, brainstorming for the video. They decided to stand in front of the embassy and give a simple introduction. Since it was Carrie's first time filming, he was especially nervous. Though he's cool answering tough questions over dinner, he struggled to organize a few simple words. He repeated the same lines over and over. Finally, he waved at the guy holding the camera. No, let's do it again. I'm too nervous. Jason chuckled. You're doing great already. Feeling shy, Carrie covered his face. I still feel I'm not good enough. I'm afraid people's comments will make fun of us. After all, it represents the embassy's image. Carrie gestured again to try once more. Jason reassured him, relax, just be yourself. Carrie took a deep breath and delivered the lines he had practiced dozens of times smoothly. Together they checked the video multiple times, and once satisfied, they began editing. Soon the edited video was uploaded to the platform. That night, the U.S. Embassy posted dozens of videos. Every staff member made an appearance, earnestly introducing their roles, with some affairs kept private. Their lively language piqued interest among viewers, especially Carrie and Jason, whose matching faces drew comments like handsome couple. Some even asked if they were single and how to contact them. Staff responded to each query with patience. When they heard the two weren't single and were actually dating, fans went wild, saying, I knew it, they're such a great match. Can't we see more of them? Official page? They're adorable. Seeing the comments, Carrie and Jason exchanged a smile. Who knew a brief appearance would be so successful? So, should we give the fans what they want? Carrie asked Jason with a grin. Jason lovingly patted his head. Sure, whatever you say. Thus, besides international meetings and cultural exchanges, they also took on video-making duties. They expanded their content to promote their country's culture. During national holidays, the entire embassy team would appear before the camera to elaborate on their culture. A week after posting the video, the embassy's account gained over 1 million followers. Carrie and Jason gained some fame too. Every time they attended meetings, international guests would delightfully say, I know you both, I've seen your videos. Great match and great videos. Thanks to your introduction, I'm intrigued by your country's culture. Carrie would smile, nodding to the guests. Whenever you get the chance, do visit my country. There's much more culture waiting for you to explore. The video's success not only boosted the embassy's reputation, but also sparked interest in their country among international guests. Everyone at the embassy was thrilled. Outside, though, someone wasn't so happy. Henry watched Carrie and Jason smile in the video, feeling bitter. He had been near the embassy for a month, without even a glimpse of Carrie. His suspicious behavior earned him a warning from the embassy. If not for family connections, he'd likely have been detained. Desperate to see Carrie, he stumbled upon the embassy video, learning about Carrie's job for the first time. He realized her life had become something he didn't know. He wanted to leave a comment, but his words could cause unnecessary trouble for Carrie. Even more heartbreaking, Carrie seemed unaware of his existence and had fallen for a colleague. Not seeing Carrie was painful, but her dating someone else felt like a nightmare. Why did it end up this way? Carrie once loved him so much. How did she end up in another man's arms? He wanted to talk to him and get some answers, but he never really got the chance. Henry, full of pain, covered his face with his hands, letting out a bitter laugh. What now? What can he do? Just when Henry was desperately trying to find a way to meet with Carrie, his phone rang at home. It was from the John family, which had recently formed a new partnership with Henry's family. They were hosting a private party. The caller repeatedly reminded Henry to be on time. He didn't really want to go at first, but when he heard Carrie would be there, his reluctance immediately turned into overwhelming joy. He kept confirming with the person on the phone. After reassurance, Henry was so excited he was at a loss for words. This meant he finally had the chance to see Carrie and talk to her. If he tried hard enough, he believed he could win her back. With that thought, he hurried to the safe. Deep in the safe was a stunning diamond necklace. This necklace wasn't just Carrie's favorite in their past life, but also the one she clutched tightly as she passed. It was the first wedding gift he ever gave her. She had been moved to tears when she saw it, not just because it was her first gift, but because he had made it himself. He had looked at Carrie lovingly, saying the necklace represented his profound love for her and their undying romance. Whenever she was angry, one look at the necklace would diffuse it. This time he wanted to personally give it to her and ask for forgiveness. Clutching the necklace tightly, determination flashed in his eyes. She would forgive him. At the embassy, Carrie also received an invitation from the John family. Typically, she wasn't allowed at such parties because of her status, but the host was her mother's mentor. Carrie's mom was in Africa for work and couldn't attend, so Carrie had to go. This also meant she'd see Henry. Carrie let out a long sigh. She felt she had already made herself clear to Henry, but she knew his temperament. He probably didn't listen and would just pester her more. Seeing Carrie worried, Jason tightened his grip on her hand, comforting her by saying it was okay and he'd manage everything. The party was private, offering high confidentiality, so no one without an invitation could get in. This gave guests a sense of security. With this assurance, Carrie finally relaxed, holding hands with Jason as they headed to the garden for some fresh air. Just as they were about to walk in, a shadow emerged from the side. Henry's eyes held a flash of pain seeing the two so close. Even though he'd seen many pictures of them online, seeing it in person hurt. He clenched his fist to suppress the urge to move forward. "Freed, I need to talk to you," he stammered. Carrie looked at the man beside her for a moment. With Jason's nod, she turned to Henry saying, "What do you want to say?" The scene had already pierced Henry's eyes. He took a deep breath. "What you told me last time, I remember it clearly. I've thought about it for a long time. You were right. I shouldn't have kept you by my side or stopped you from following your dreams. You didn't want to be a bird in a cage, and I understand that now. I won't trap you again. Can you give me another chance to win you back? Come back to me?" His words were filled with deep, sincere affection, but to Carrie it felt ironic. She indeed never wanted to be a caged bird. She wanted to soar freely and not be bound by anyone. Even if she was in love or married in the future, her partner would need to support her dreams. But Henry misunderstood. He thought it meant not confining her to their home, but keeping her by his side 24/7. If she were a kite, she used to be trapped in a box he made, and now he'd let her out, but he still held the string unforgivingly tight. Feeling exhausted, Carrie knew she and Henry just didn't see eye to eye. They couldn't discuss anything. Lowering her gaze, she held Jason's hand. "Henry, I'll never return to you because I have someone I love now." Catching this, Henry instinctively reached out but, seeing Carrie's calm gaze, pulled his hand back. The hardest thing for Henry was hearing Carrie admit she now loved someone else. Before, he could deceive himself, believing her relationship with Jason was just for work. But now he couldn't lie anymore. Still, he was unwilling to give up. How could Carrie, who had pursued him for so long, love someone else now? Carrie couldn't read Henry's emotions. She calmly stated the truth. "You don't really miss my company. You just aren't used to being without me." Though Henry was well dressed today, the poorly tied bow tie revealed that without her, his care was lacking. He wasn't accustomed to care from anyone but her. The young master who was always served by others since he was a kid, was now taking care of himself. It was awkward, of course. Also, I'm not jumping into the same pit of fire again. Henry, if you've got any feelings left, stop bothering me. Finally, Carrie raised her intertwined fingers with Jason's for Henry to see, even shaking their tightly held hands in front of him. They didn't look back at Henry once more and just turned to leave. Right then, something unexpected happened. A sudden loud explosion came from right in front of them. The two men's faces changed as they both lunged towards Carrie. Another explosion followed, sending countless debris hurtling towards them, burying them in an instant. Screams and cries were muffled by the thick debris. "Carrie, are you okay?" In the darkness, Carrie vaguely saw Jason shielding her, reaching out with effort to touch him. "I'm fine. How about you? Are you hurt?" Jason let out a relieved breath. "I'm alright, not really hurt." He lied because he could feel the sticky blood on his back. He didn't want her to worry. At that moment, another weak voice came from the side. "Carrie, are you alright?" Carrie froze, suddenly remembering Henry was beside them too. Gathering her thoughts, she replied, "I'm fine." "You?" Henry shook his head, saying he was fine too. After that, calmness fell beneath the debris. Everyone stayed silent to conserve their strength. Carrie never thought waiting for rescue could feel so long enough that she almost lost track of time. Her own bleeding wounds had started to clot. Just when she was about to drift off, she heard digging above. Soon the darkness broke apart as those above cleared the debris, a faint light piercing through layers of black, lighting up Carrie's face. In that light, she looked at Jason, who was shielding her, and with pale faces, they exchanged smiles filled with relief from escaping disaster. The opening was small, so rescuers could only pull them out one by one. They exchanged a glance and quickly said, "Get the person next to us out first. We can wait." Hearing this, Henry's eyes flashed with surprise. He didn't expect Carrie would want him out first. Did this mean she actually cared about him? The thought made his hands tremble slightly. Quickly, Henry was rescued, followed by the rescue of Carrie and Jason. As Carrie was being rescued, something unexpected happened again. A large piece of debris was about to crash onto Jason below. Jason! Carrie's instincts acted faster than her mind. Before she knew it, she was jumping back into the debris, pinning Jason to the ground. "Carrie! Carrie!" Two male voices called out in succession. Jason looked at the girl shielding him, a complex emotion flashing in his eyes. Meanwhile, Henry, who freed himself from the rescuers and ran over, saw the two tightly locked in a protective embrace and felt his previous thoughts seemed laughable. Carrie showing him any care felt trivial in comparison to this scene. His hand clenched tightly at his side, bitterness rising from his chest to his throat. Soon they were sent to a nearby hospital. Luckily, there were no casualties. Since it was a private party, the host quickly covered up the news. As for the explosion's cause, the host just briefly mentioned to the guests that it was an act of revenge and the John family would handle it, assuring them not to worry. Additionally, Carrie and Jason's teacher came to visit them privately. After confirming they were okay, he left that same night. In the private hospital room, after visits from the party host, their teacher, and a string of others, Carrie and Jason could finally lie down for some rest. Carrie picked up the medication beside her to apply it to Jason's wounds. Seeing the large scars on his back, her eyes flashed with heartache. "These wounds are so serious. Why didn't you tell them earlier? That way the rescuers could have saved you first and you wouldn't have undergone more harm." Jason gently wiped away the moisture from Carrie's eyes with his thumb. "It's just a small injury, really nothing." He hadn't told her. Under the rubble, though he had remained calm in tone, his trembling grip had betrayed his worry for her. He didn't want to add to her worries. Carrie didn't speak, quietly setting the remaining medication aside. Turning her back to him, she lay down on her bed. Jason's eyes flashed with panic as she quickly reached out to grab him. Carrie didn't turn around. After a while, she took a deep breath and spoke, "We used to be comrades. I didn't have the right to be upset if you kept your injuries from me. But now, besides being comrades, we're also boyfriend and girlfriend, and in the future, family. Hiding your injuries only makes me more worried." Jason clasped his hands tightly, before hugging her from behind. "I'm sorry, but Carrie, I didn't want to make you sad. But knowing you're hurt and not telling me makes me sadder." Carrie looked down at his arms around her waist, her small hands covering his big ones after a long pause. Such a warm sight inadvertently pierced Henry's eyes at the door. For a moment, he didn't have the courage to step in and break this warmth. Eventually, Jason in the room noticed someone at the door first, nodding politely toward Henry without loosening his grip on Carrie's waist. "Henry, is there something you need?" Carrie finally noticed Henry at the door. She was never used to such displays of intimacy in front of others, so she instinctively tried to break free from Jason's embrace. Seeing her shyness, Jason decided not to hold her any longer. So he ended up holding her hand, even though both had toned it down a lot. To Henry it was still glaring. He even felt a strong urge to rush over and tear their hands apart, but he knew deep down he couldn't. He wasn't allowed to. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" At the end of the corridor, two figures crisscrossed closely on the floor. It took Henry a while to tear his gaze away and look at Carrie, who kept her distance from him. "Carrie, you said you don't love me anymore. But you chose to save me first. Doesn't that mean you still care about me?" Carrie rarely remained silent. Henry got more and more excited. "So did I guess right? I knew it. We're meant to be. How can you just let go so easily? If you still care about me, doesn't that mean there's still a chance for us?" Carrie remained silent again. He hadn't expected just a simple rescue to lead Henry to imagine so much. Sure, they were connected by fate twice, but it's not like what he said. unable to let go. Quite the opposite, deciding to let go. Happened in an instant. First, I saved you out of responsibility and duty. As a diplomat, I have the obligation to rescue citizens abroad. This has nothing to do with my personal feelings for you. Second, though we have fate together in 2 lives, I've long let you go. When you and the child kept leaving me to find Becky. When you told Becky the real reason for marrying me in those 1,000 texts. When you repeatedly ditched me in this life or hung up on my calls for help. Every hurt you gave me was a reason to leave. Henry instinctively wanted to argue, but Carrie cut him off. I know what you're going to say. Sure, those things are past. I shouldn't hold on to them. But the damage they did to me isn't something an apology can hide. Maybe it was the heat of the moment, or maybe the grievances from 2 lives. Carrie finally found a release. She looked at the person in front of her. Do you even know? The real issue between us isn't those things. To you, my personality just fits being Mrs. a trophy wife to attend parties. But Henry, I'm a person too. My status, education, and experience are no less than yours. I have my own life, my own dreams. I never wanted to revolve only around you, sacrificing myself. In your eyes, I'm like a kite. No matter how high I fly, the string is always in your hands. But I don't want to be a kite. I want to be a bird soaring the skies. I hope my future partner can fly with me. But you can't do that, you won't. People are selfish. But Henry's selfishness was just too obvious. With that, Carrie stopped looking at him, turned and headed back to her ward. The silhouette on the floor quickly stood alone. Once discharged, Carrie and Jason quickly dove into work. Besides attending international meetings, they squeezed in cultural exchanges. Their video projects left to new partners. In the upcoming months, their lives became busier, fuller. Soon, Carrie and Jason were set for the spring festival break. Exceptionally, they planned to meet Jason's parents. But getting on the flight, Carrie spotted someone unexpected, Henry. Since the explosion incident, she hadn't seen him. Unexpectedly, here they met on the plane. Henry too was surprised to see Carrie here. After their last talk, Henry's heart was in pieces. He'd been the one dragging Carrie down, in love, but watching her climb out with all her might, hand in hand with another man walking away, while he sank deeper. Everyone told him there was no chance, yet he wouldn't give up. As a kid, after races, he'd win second and hear praise, but he wouldn't settle. He craved first. Today, all urging him to give up Carrie, yet he refused. Thinking back, he greeted Carrie, asking about her trip. Without lifting her eyes, those 3 words, seeing the parents, froze Henry to the core. For a moment, did he hear wrong? Meeting the parents? She and Jason? During the flight, Henry felt a stupor, wanting to speak but words eluded him. In his mind, 2 voices tangled. One saying, "Let go, Henry. It's over." The other pleading, "Don't, Henry. If you quit, Rebirth meant nothing." Even upon landing, he was stuck in the shock of Carrie meeting Jason's parents. He muddle-headedly followed her towards the airport exit. Just then, screeching brakes sounded. With terrified screams, Henry instinctively pushed Carrie aside, only to be struck by a speeding black car, violently tossed aside. Blood streamed from Henry's head, blurred his sight, but he saw Carrie rushing over. Before heavy eyelids sealed shut, Henry, outside the operating room, Carrie landed a hard slap on Becky's face. Yet Becky, like a puppet, lay on the ground, devoid of reaction. Carrie shook with anger, knowing Becky's cold heart. But it was unexpected. Who knew Becky could be so ruthless, trying to take her own life twice? If Henry hadn't rushed over in time to push her away, it would be her lying in the operating room today. The butler nearby kept having the bodyguards restrain Becky and apologized non-stop to Carrie. Ever since Carrie's parents abandoned Becky, she became part of their family. Plus, Becky refused to sign the divorce papers. So whenever Becky messed up, they had to clean it up. This time, somehow Becky got wind that Carrie was coming back and snuck out overnight. Just thinking about it made the butler furious. The servants at the villa were definitely going to be punished. But calming Carrie's anger was more urgent now. Carrie wasn't just the heiress, She was a diplomat. Attempted murder of a diplomat, just the thought of that could cause an online uproar, not to mention the stock drop. The butler instinctively wanted to apologize to Carrie standing next to him. But Carrie's eyes were filled with concern for Henry in the operating room. After all, Henry was hurt because of her. She didn't want to owe him anymore. Now the only thing to do was wait for him to come out. Beside her, Jason held her hand tight, offering silent comfort. As for everything else, it was all left to their secretary to handle. Just as the secretary and the butler dealt with matters, Henry was finally wheeled out after his procedure. The day Henry woke up, Carrie went into his hospital room alone. Upon entering, she saw Henry sitting on the hospital bed waiting for her. Thanking him for all the material and emotional support they provided Henry, Carrie couldn't find anything more to say. Unexpectedly, Henry said it was no problem, and then just as Carrie was leaving, he asked Carrie to bring Jason in. Carrie paused but quickly let Jason enter the hospital room. Who knows what the two of them talked about? When Jason came out, he looked a bit off, but when Carrie asked him, he just faked a smile. On their way home, Carrie got a call from the secretary. Clearly, the secretary explained Becky's motive for the car attack on Carrie. Pure spite for unrequited love. Becky had loved Henry for years, finally thinking she would get her wish. Yet, in the end, Henry found out about Becky's true nature and fell for Carrie again. Becky was never a match for Carrie, and now the man she had barely managed to win over was leaving her because of Carrie. How could Becky stand that? If she couldn't have him, then Carrie wouldn't have him either. So, Becky decided to run Carrie over with her car. Finally, the secretary asked if Becky wanted to meet with Carrie, but Carrie flatly refused. For Carrie, seeing a sister twisted by a man wasn't worth it. After hanging up, Carrie was silent for a long time, thinking about how things got to this point with Becky. A lot of it was because of Henry, a two-timer who couldn't give up either of them. This resulted in such a tragic ending for both her and Becky. When Carrie closed her eyes and leaned back in her seat, next to her Jason watched, his heart aching for her. Quickly, he took out his phone and sent a text to someone. After meeting with her parents, Carrie and Jason hurried to Africa to see Carrie's dad. Once both visits were done, Carrie and Jason started planning their engagement. Given their unique positions, they kept it simple. Despite this, many guests came on their engagement day, except for Henry, who was noticeably absent. This surprised Carrie. As obsessed as Henry was, she thought he might crash the party, even if he couldn't whisk her away, just say something to mess with her feelings. If Henry were feeling extra crazy, he might have caused a scene, loudly declaring he didn't approve of the union. Therefore, Carrie made various preparations to prevent any chaos. Instead, not only did Henry not come, but he sent over an engagement gift, one that was appropriate and didn't give the wrong impression. When Jason saw this gift, his eyes darkened, and he recalled his conversation with Henry in the hospital. Then Henry no longer had the same charm, only bitterness. Henry said he was willing to withdraw from this chase of love. He told Jason to treat her well, or else he'd come snatch her back again. Jason's first reaction wasn't to argue or make bold claims to prevent that from happening. He found it strange. Though he'd only met Henry a few times, they were enough to know Henry wasn't the type to give in easily. A single car accident and Henry willingly backed off. It was weird. This puzzled Jason even now as to why Henry suddenly gave up. Carrie and Jason silently looked at the engagement gift for a long time before finally letting the butler put it away. In the villa's study, heavy curtains blocked out the sunlight, shrouding the room in darkness. Just then someone knocked on the door from outside. The butler pushed open the door. A sliver of light snuck in, landing on the man in the wheelchair. "Sir, the engagement gift has been delivered as you requested," he said. Henry, seated in the wheelchair, just nodded. The butler closed the door again, plunging the room back into darkness. After a long while, Henry shifted his gaze to his disabled legs. Even though the doctor had politely said there was hope he'd walk again, Henry knew better. He knew the chances were slim to none. He was too proud to let anyone see his weakness, especially Carrie. That's why he let Carrie go, why he wasn't going to her engagement party. Besides, even if he weren't disabled, Carrie wasn't going to choose him again. She stopped loving him a long time ago. He was just fooling himself. If it weren't for that car accident, He would have stayed lost in his own lies forever. And then there was Becky. He couldn't divorce her. There was that rule about not abandoning your spouse in their worst times. Even if Becky had to spend 15 years in prison, he couldn't divorce her. Even if he could wait for Becky to get out and then divorce her, Carrie wouldn't wait. Thinking about it, he covered his face, letting out a bitter laugh. All those laughs turned into sobs. What he'd done had come back to bite him. He and Carrie were really over. After a long time, he picked up his phone and opened the video a friend sent. In it, Carrie and Jason exchanged loving looks and rings. The engaged couple kissed amid cheers and applause, like a fairy tale ending. Only he was left with this tragic ending. From now on, he and Carrie were like parallel lines, never meeting again. He couldn't say he was pitiful, only that he deserved it. After all, he brought it all on himself. Carrie, may your life be full of everything you want, except me, the sinner. The end.